Yo, what's up everybody, Swillow here, and today we have our next character guide. This was a highly requested guide. I knew this was coming, I saw it coming, and here it is. And you guys are gonna love this guide because compared to the Urbosa guide, there's gonna be a lot of juicy stuff in here. So let's get right into this. First off, we're gonna show off the Y string like I did with Urbosa. We're gonna see how far it goes from the starting point. So let's check this out. So as you can see there, he doesn't go very far at all. A huge contrast to most characters, he doesn't have a lot of momentum in his Y string. Now, normally you would think that you want a lot of momentum in your Y string, but there's benefits to not having a lot of movement in your Y string as well, which is that you can really focus fire on specific targets and set up certain situations a lot easier when you know you don't have a lot of mobility in your moveset to account for. We can also look at his air version Y string. So that goes just slightly further than his ground version, but still you're very stationary. So when you're playing as Revali, you have to play with that in mind, that he's a very stationary character and you want to really position yourself from the get-go based on what kind of strings and setups you're trying to do. So first let's go in here and look at Revali. We're going to look at the Y string on the mob. So I mean, it's pretty standard. The first couple hits are kind of whatever, but the rapid fire at the end is actually really good because of the speed of it. It's just really good for like dumping damage. So you can see right there on the moblin there, you can dump like a nice chunk of damage off that rapid fire at the end. It especially works well for breaking weak point gauges. So you see right there, I can take off a couple of quick chunks from the weak point gauge with his Y string, and it becomes even better in Stasis, which I'll show that. But overall, his Y string functions pretty well, I think. It's short and sweet, right? It's short and sweet, it's to the point. It's actually really strong, despite not looking that strong, I feel. Next up, we're going to look at the YX. So YX is a pretty cool move. I actually think this is one of his better moves in his whole kit. Despite him being more focused on airplay, I think his ground YX is actually really strong. So some cool things you can do with this, you know, he's gonna drop the explosive arrows, which do a nice chunk of damage and weak point damage in themselves, but you can see it leaves behind a little whirlwind, which can do some damage to enemies. It can just kind of juggle them and be its own little crowd control element in a way. You can also do some interesting loops off of it, so you can dash cancel and you can loop it into your dash attack. Or even just like if you're not doing a backdash, you just do YX into that move and just repeat it. And that actually becomes one of his best methods of damage and breaking weak points. So let's see if I get his weak point out. We just stasis him real quick. So you can see, like, I can loop that and I can get some pretty crazy damage and weak point damage. It's actually really strong. So right out the gate, we already have a super strong option that can loop well into itself. Next, let's look at YYX. Maybe I'll get it. All right, there we go. So what he does is he grabs an enemy. He can only grab smaller mob type enemies, not boss enemies. He'll go into the air, and you can see he can get hit out of that animation. Of course, he's not like invincible. Maybe like he's more he's harder to hit out of certain parts of it when he's more airborne, but he can get hit out of certain parts of that. Overall, this move is really bad. There's really no other way to put it. There's no reason to use the move. Like, it looks cool. It could be cool and doing some cool stylish setups. That's it. But like, the damage isn't there. Even if you look at like the collateral damage it can deal to the moblin, it's such a focused long duration attack, and it really doesn't have the damage to make up for it. You know, if the damage was there, if it had like a bigger splash, I don't know. It just, all around, it's a pretty weak move. You know, it's a style move. That's about it. And I'm pretty sure you can actually dash cancel it before they actually like drop the moblin. Yeah, so you can dash cancel it early, just to be like just to be a weirdo and do some cool setups and stuff like that, I guess. But Yeah, it is what it is. Now let's look at his X. Watch out for that. So the X, he's just gonna swoop, and he ends in a state that you can sort of go into other moves. Like you can transition into your Y string pretty cleanly from it, though it usually helps. You can see I even get my dash attack. If you input before he touches the ground, you'll actually even get your dash Y, which I find interesting. So it's kind of like a neat move, but I don't think it's particularly strong either. Once again, it's more of a style move than I feel like it has practical use. But it can be a good opener. It can be a good way to initiate an enemy. So you can see the distance. You can see like I can get in there really quick. So you're really going to use it for the movement more than anything. Just to quickly get in there and then cancel into something really valuable. In terms of an actual attack, it's functional, but it's not one of his best. But the movement on it allows you to close the gap very quickly. So let me show that once again. So you can see I can close the gap super quick and start using my stronger attacks. Okay, so next up, we're going to have to talk about his unique mechanic to talk about more of his moveset, since most of his moveset is in the air. So when you press ZR, if you're on the ground, he's going to go airborne. In this airborne state, I have the enhanced ability on him. Let me kind of show this in the description. So if you see down here in his unique action at the bottom, it says while flying, damage enemies in your wake. So this is an enhanced version of his ability, which you're not going to start the game with. So this guide is taking into account that you have this advanced ability. But you see, just flying around will literally cause enemies to juggle, take damage, and all of that. So that's pretty cool. This allows you to just move and traverse pretty freely. It gives him great movement through maps, so he can just really focus on the bosses. And even if you're not even moving, like just me focusing on the moblin, I don't even have to worry about any of the other threats around me, because they're going to constantly get juggled by the wind effect. And this also damages bosses too. It's to a smaller effect, but it works. So this is a really cool thing. It's just all passive damage. Really cool. But let's get back to talking more about how his ZR works. So when you're on the ground, you're going to go airborne, and if you're in the air, you're going to go back to the ground. Now this also functions based on the move you're doing. Certain moves will have you more in the air or more on the ground. So let's say if I use the dash attack, he kind of swoops down into the ground, and depending on where I press ZR during this animation, he can do either, if I press it when he touches the ground, he'll go up. If I press it towards the end when he swoops, whoops, I did that too early. When he swoops up, he'll go down. I keep messing it up, but so you see right there. So you can consider that for all of your attacks. You see I'm airborne here, so if I press ZR, I'm going to go back to the ground. And you can sort of manipulate that how you see fit. So if he kind of touches the ground during certain moves, you can press ZR to cancel into an airborne state. Or if you're airborne, you can get back to the ground quickly by using ZR. Really cool. And I'm definitely going to show that off to great effect in his air moveset. So let's get back in the air. And we're going to show off the Y string in the air. So the Y string in the air is like ridiculous, dude. The range on it, it's pretty fast. It does pretty good damage, good weak point damage. Like just his Y string alone is very devastating in the air. You can get a lot of mileage out of this. The crowd control especially. Alright, so next, let's show off this YX. So the YX, he sort of does a little swoopy-doop. I don't even know what to call that. He just kind of swings his wings around, and he throws the enemies a little bit. It has a bit of an area effect to it. It's really hard to distinguish what the attack is from like just the passive wind effect around him. Overall, I don't think it's like an amazing move. The damage on it isn't anything crazy. It's all right. Like it's just something simple to throw out. Weak point damage on it is relatively soft. Like it works if you just need like a quick, strong attack. Really, I don't think it's that impressive compared to some other options in his kit though. Next up, we have YYX. So this is a really, really cool move. There's two ways you can use this move. If you just press YYX, you're going to throw out these whirlwinds, and they're just going to stay on the screen and do passive damage. And if you press X again, he'll actually kind of like do a follow-up attack where he'll explode the wind, and it'll just deal like a quick burst of damage. So you can utilize both methods. I like the passive version more, where you just like leave it out and let it stay out there. I think it has more setup potential and overall, but I would say like the follow-up is really good when you just need that quick burst of damage, you know, like when you're breaking a weak point gauge or something. So definitely utilize both of them as you see fit. And I'm gonna show you like an example of how you can use this YYX. So if I use YYX, I can press ZR and go back to the ground very quickly. So I can cancel out that. I mean, you can still dash cancel and stay in the air if you want, but you can go down to the ground after doing it, and then you can go into some strong ground options or something, which I'll actually show later on. I'll actually show some nice setups with this, but that's one example of how you can use the ZR to cancel out of an attack animation early. Next up, we have YYYX. So when you do this, you're going to go into an aiming stance, and he shoots an explosive arrow. So overall, this move isn't like crazy good, but it's not bad either. Like it does what it does. You get a free aim shot that deals like a decent chunk of damage, not like a crazy amount, but for how fast the move is, it's functional damage. Overall, I don't use this move too much. I think it's kind of a fun move, but it's not like one of the strongest in this kit. Next, we have Y times 4. So this is a really, really good move in his kit. It's probably going to be his best air option in terms of overall utility and damage. So he's going to dive kick to the ground. And when he dive kicks to the ground, you can notice that a tornado comes out, right? So that's going to come out, and that's just going to deal some pretty nice passive damage. And there's a lot of tricks off of this move. So let's get right into this. First off, you can go into... just go straight into your ground options. Like you can dash cancel and then go straight into your ground options. That's pretty straightforward. You can also guard cancel the landing, which gives you really good follow-ups. So if I dash cancel the second I touch the ground, like I can go into a lot of stuff after that, any of my ground options. Hold on, let me try to show a setup real quick. I don't think this is gonna work though, because his weak point's about to break, but... So we guard cancel right here. Then we can instantly go into YX. And just do all kinds of fun stuff, really. So it's really cool. You get a lot of cancel points. And then next up, I'm gonna show you something really, really cool. Shoutouts to my boy Ren Harasaki once again. He discovered this tech where when you use the dive kick, you're gonna, if you use stasis pretty much right when you touch the ground, you'll get this sliding effect. So hopefully I can show this off, because it can be a little tricky with the timing. So you can see right there, right before you touch the ground with the Y times 4 into X, the dive kick, if you go into stasis, you'll just slide across the ground. The utility of this tech is not really there. This is like very much for fun. I mean, you could use it for some quick movement on some big maps if you're just very consistent with executing it. But overall, it's more style than anything. And it can be good traversal on some maps, open maps like the desert map. You know, the desert map is more open and it doesn't have a lot of walls and stuff that you could potentially hit. But it's really interesting. And one of the best ways to find the timing for it is just to hold the R1. You see when you hold the stasis menu, it sort of slows down time. So you can get a feel for the timing. You know, once you know the timing well, you don't have to hold the stasis the whole time. But this gives you, so you see, even with the stasis thing, the timing can be a little tricky. Like I just practiced this like right before I made this guide. So I'm not 100% on the Not 100% on the timing yet, but pretty much it's just like right before you touch the ground. Right before he touches the ground. Let me see if I can try to just show this one more time. So there we go. That's pretty silly. But yeah, fun tech right there. Do as you see fit with it. Next, we're going to talk about his final charge in the air. So Y times 5 into X. So he sort of zips around and then he goes back to the ground and he shoots an explosive arrow. This explosive arrow, as you can see, it will expose the weak point gauge. Now, this move is really strong. It's probably one of his best options simply because it exposes the weak point gauge and it does do solid damage as well. Similar to Urbosa in the last guide, like it has this movement in it, this zipping movement where it can be easy to it can be easy to lose track of this move, especially if you're close to the enemy. Like if you try to do this right next to the enemy, it'll hit in most cases, but it'll just get like really wonky. Like some of the hitboxes feel like they just don't always hit 100%. I think in that case that was pretty good. Everything mostly hit. I mean, when you're really trying to set it up, or in a situation like this where I don't have a lot going on, it's pretty easy to hit. But you know, throughout playing just a regular map and dealing with all the craziness that could potentially pop up, you may find yourself in situations where this move just isn't hitting the way that you feel like it should be hitting. So it's really good, but you do have to consider your positioning and what's going on around you, because you could potentially get moved around or just not line up your shot correctly. Okay, so next let's talk about the Stasis abilities. We have the bomb. So the bomb is extremely straightforward. He just spawns 4 bombs and throws them forward, straight to the point. Next up we have Magnesis. So Magnesis, he's just going to grab a bunch of stuff. He kind of creates a little whirlwind before throwing it at his target. Next, we have Cryosis. Is that what it's called? Cryosis? So he's going to spawn these cubes. He's going to spawn 4 of them. And you can just kind of navigate around them. You can even wall jump off them. Wall jumping with Revali is a little weird because he can just go into the air whenever he wants. But it's an option, you know. If you want to stunt on the walls, then stunt on the walls. Next, we have Stasis. So his Stasis is one of the best Stasis in the game. And it's one of the few that you'll actually let the attack come out. So when he stasis them, he's going to shoot the barrage of arrows. And it's very ideal to let the arrows come out before you dash cancel. You can dash cancel before the arrows come out, but you should usually just let the arrows come out because it's a nice added damage. And it's not like a long animation comparative to other characters' stasis, where if you let the whole attack rock, then you're going to pretty much be out of stasis by the time it's done. So he actually has a really good stasis attack, and the stasis duration is pretty impressive too. I think it's definitely better than most other characters. This actually makes Revali one of the better characters in terms of breaking weak points, because it's like if you don't break a weak point on a stasis, then that definitely means that you weren't executing like a strong setup, because he has enough time on his stasis to break a full weak point gauge, except maybe against some of the more sturdy ones. There's some of the more sturdy weak point gauges, maybe not. I haven't practiced setups on every type of enemy in this game, but in general his weak point gauge breaking power is really strong, and you should be able to break a full one in a stasis more times than not. So let me get him to expose his weak point, and then I'm going to show you an example of some weak point breaking setups. I have a few weak point breaking setups that I can show with this character. So we got Stasis here. So the YX loop, I already showed that earlier. I actually even showed breaking weak point with it, but just doing the YX loop, dash cancel, YX, that's gonna break a weak, just looping that over and over will break weak points. Now this is gonna be an interesting one. This is gonna be a really interesting one. So let me get him to expose his weak point. And this next one, we're just gonna use the Y string. So just the Y string alone can break a weak point, a full weak point gauge. Pretty crazy, right? But that's basically, I was already foreshadowing that earlier when I mentioned how strong it was at breaking weak points. So let me just show that one more time. So as you can see there, just looping his Y string on the ground is an easy weak point gauge break. Now let's show some setups from the air. So I can do YYX. So you can see what I did there is I did the YYX in the air. Once the wind came out, I did the ZR cancel to the ground. Whoops. So I did YYX, ZR canceled, then I did YX, dash canceled, and then I just went straight into the Y string to finish off the rest of the weak point gauge. Now, that doesn't break as efficiently as the first two setups I showed, as you saw, because the stasis wore off and he still had just a little bit more weak point gauge to go. But if you're in the air and if you're looking for an actual air setup, then that's a good setup that can break a weak point gauge. So not to mention, you have to factor in that I started the setup from the ground, so I did waste a little bit of my time. Normally, if you start the setup directly from the air, you'll most likely break it before stasis runs out. So that's worth considering as well. So another setup I'm going to show with the dive kick. Be still. So that's a really, really strong setup right there. So what I did in the air is I did the Y times 4 into X, which is his dive kick. I guard canceled it once I touched the ground and went straight into the YX. So really, really strong. And even if you don't even like do the guard cancel, you're still gonna be able to get that pretty solidly. So let me show that. So see, even without doing like guard cancel and using dash cancel instead, you're still gonna get a very nice setup off of that. So the dive kick is probably one of his best options from the air in terms of breaking a weak point. And then we can also look at his final string, C6, C5, whatever. Y times 5 into X. So obviously this can start combo. It's a little different because we can actually start the weak point breaking process with the move. But let's say maybe you want to actually use it in a weak point breaking combo. So you see the move basically just breaks weak point on its own. So there you go. It does it. It's pretty good. I think you can get a little bit more damage if you do one of the more elaborate setups. But you can just straight up break a weak point with that move alone. And of course, that might not be entirely the case for each enemy. You know, this moblin here doesn't have the same duration as every enemy in the game. But relative to the rest of Revali's moveset, it works in that fashion. But I think some of the other setups I showed you earlier, you're going to get more damage out of them. So I would consider some of those other setups, especially the dive kick setup. I think that's probably just one of the best ones all around in terms of damage and consistency. Next up, let's show Revali's special. So as you can see there, Revali's special is actually one of the more unique ones, I guess you could say, because it's not just like a single hit like most characters. Most characters' specials more of just a single hitting attack, but his actually does a barrage fire of hits, and I don't know the potential for those hits to miss. They always seem like they consistently connect, so it may just be more of a visual or an aesthetic type theme going on. But it's just worth noting that his special attack does hit multiple times, and there could be potential for not all those hits to connect depending on certain circumstances. So that's pretty much it for the Revali guide. Like, he's a character that, if you've been watching my streams, I've been talking about him in ways that I feel like he wasn't as strong. But when I actually sat down and explored his kit, he's actually a really good character, I think. He's a lot better than I initially felt after I sat down and studied this character more. His ground string, like his YX and just his Y string in general, are really impressive for breaking weak points. And his air dive kick leads to so many good setups. And especially his stasis. Like, I really underestimated how good his stasis is because it lasts longer than most other characters. So you can really just break weak points very consistently with his stasis setups. So I hope this guide was helpful to you all. Just drop your recommendations in the comments for the next character guide. I know somebody mentioned in the last video that I can make like a little community poll or something. I'll look into doing that. But for now, just drop the comment of who you would like to see next. Yo, what's up everybody? So I had to come back real quick because I forgot to mention something about one of his strings. So this YYX, where he grabs the enemy and slams them down. If you continue to press X afterwards, you can get a follow-up off of it. So this is the follow-up. He shoots a few barrage of explosive arrows. Now this attack itself is really strong, but of course, like I mentioned, the grab is bad and you have to actually grab an enemy for this to work. You can't just use the follow-up unless you grab an enemy. So it's super situational. If you can set it up, the follow-up itself can be pretty good, but it's a lot of work and you're probably just gonna stick to other options in most cases. So let me just try to hit the goblin so you can see an example of how damaging this attack can be. So you see it does a lot of weak point damage. It does a lot of damage in general. So if you can kind of set it up within battle, go for it. But it's a tricky move because you have to land that grab. Anyways, peace.